main focus is going to be the New York State process, and we need to, just as we did when we first started our group, you know, have a bit of a civics lesson and better understand how things work. So we asked Shelley Mayer to come and talk us through how a bill goes from, you know, somebody coming up with the idea of it to a law being enacted. And she's going to help us with that and also talk us through the budget process. Okay? Shelley Mayer.
As long as I can see, I think I'm good. And first of all, because George, who was in the Assembly and Senate, and Gary, who's been in the Assembly longer than I think George or I, although count the staff time, and I come close, please jump in if you think I'm incorrect. This is really a summary of the state legislative process from a fairly neutral point of view, although we tried to indicate places where activism plays a role and where it's useful to jump in. So move ahead. Okay, that's the outline. Let's just move to the next one. This is the beginning. Okay, we're a bill idea. Now this is a little bit of caveat. We are entering a new legislative season. We will start on January 9th in the State of the State. Senator Stuart Cousins will be sworn in as a new majority leader. Speaker of the Assembly. Bills that were introduced in prior sessions have to be reintroduced because as new members of the legislature, we're starting a 2-year session. They will get new numbers. They may not be exactly like they were before. So let's just put that issue to the side for a minute and talk as if we were starting anew. Because we are starting anew. So somebody has an idea, any idea, and I would be very frank, this is a place for citizen engagement. People come to our office and says, you should do this. You should change the adoption waiting time. Just an example, someone came to my office. You should shorten the amount of time it takes to get an adoption. Okay, that's a good idea. I say, let's do a bill. Just as an example. So, can come from anyone, idea, but you have to get it to a legislator to be introduced. We take the bill idea, and if you are capable of drafting a bill, as some of us who are lawyers particularly like to do ourselves, but ultimately it goes to the Legislative Bill Drafting Commission. There's a lot of acronyms, and I'm going to use them because you should get familiar with them if you want to understand the process. Each of us is assigned a bill drafter, a person who is a lawyer who works for this so-called independent commission that is controlled by Democrats and Republicans. Previously, it should change to be all democratically controlled, but we're not there yet. The idea goes to the Bill Drafting Commission. They give you back a draft bill. The bill on the draft says, this bill is referred to blank committee. So in the Assembly, a bill is referred to one committee, and in the Senate, the bill when introduced is referred to a committee. The committee of introduction, and this is important because of the politics of the committees, it reflects the section of law that is amended first in the bill. So if you're amending the criminal procedure law, it's going to go to the committee that deals with the criminal procedure law. Even though later in the bill, you may be dealing with some immigration issue, or, well, that's a federal issue, but some social services issue, it could be referred to a second committee later. But the primary committee referral is by the original section of law that is modified by the bill. So a bill is examined, corrected, given a number, which doesn't occur immediately, and sent to the appropriate committee. Exception, the executive budget, which I'm going to talk about later, is submitted directly by the governor. Because there are policy ideas in the budget, I'm going to talk about that. Everyone thinks a bill goes through this thing that you learned in 5th grade. Bill becomes a law. No. Lots of policy is in the state budget that the governor submits, and we ultimately, through compromise, enact. So I'm going to talk about that. Okay, next slide. Referral to committee, as I mentioned, it's referred to the appropriate committee. I mentioned where the section of law. Public hearings. Sometimes committees hold public hearings on bills. Sometimes they don't. They're not required to hold a public hearing. That is a place, though, that it is opportune for members of the public to weigh in. Some committee hearings are by invitation only. and you will not get a chance. Those of us who are members push to get, if it's our bill, the people we want to be able to testify so that everyone can hear their story or their testimony. Obviously, you're going to have people on both sides of an issue. But it is an appropriate place, and I encourage you, as you start to look at Assembly and Senate websites, they list the public hearings on issues and bills. Most of them are in either New York City or in Albany. Sometimes we push, as I have pushed, to have public hearings outside of New York City and Albany. Okay, committees. How the committees operate. They operate differently, in my experience, in the Assembly and the Senate. In the Assembly, okay, 150 members, veto-proof Democratic majority. There are committee chairs, like Gary, who's chair of Racing and Wagering. He's been chair for a long time, you know, and he has tremendous credibility and respect from members on both sides of the aisle. Generally speaking, Democratic members follow the vote of the chair. So the chair decides to put the bill on the agenda. Just because the bill is referred to Gary's committee doesn't mean he puts it on the agenda. He and the staff of the Assembly decide. They put the bill on the agenda. Most Democratic members who are assigned to that committee are going to vote in concert with the chair. Not always, but generally speaking. In the Senate, in the past, when the Republicans were chairs, definitely the Democrats voted. Sometimes we voted in lockstep with our Democratic ranking member. Sometimes we voted on our own, and sometimes we voted together with the chair. We made independent judgments about the bill. But they put a bill on their agenda in the past. They knew it was going to move out of committee. They didn't put it on without having the votes. It's going to change slightly now. We're a Democratic majority in the Senate. We're going to put bills on that we want to move, and we want to move quickly. So I have a point here. Questions and discussion. One of the things that struck me when I first went to the legislature in 1985, working for Attorney General Bob Abrams, is there's not a lot that happens in a committee meeting. There is not a lot of discussion and questioning. There are some exceptions where there's robust conversation in a committee meeting, but do not think that that is a place where the issues get hashed out. By the time it gets to a committee, it is likely to move and be referred from a committee onward to the next step. There are exceptions, which I'll talk about, but generally speaking, committees, other than the Health Committee in the Assembly, which has a reputation of very broad discussion and debate, generally speaking, committees have not been a place where that occurs. However, committee meetings and public attendance, there are times when public attendance in a committee meeting in the little room in Albany makes a difference on the outcome of a vote. Because if you're in one of these little rooms and you have 40 people outside sitting behind the chairs and waiting to get in, the public presence does influence votes. So there are times when, and many advocacy organizations in the past have gone to committee meetings and sometimes change a vote. Example, they didn't change my vote. Changing the vaccine laws, the anti-vaccine people, they come in large number when we have committee votes. And for some people from more rural districts or with a lot of homeschooling, their presence there can change their vote. So just an example of physical presence at a committee meeting can have an influence, sort of an outsized influence. Next slide. Referral to the floor. Okay, important to understand. The vast majority of bills that are on committee agendas in both houses are voted out for referral either to the next committee, which I will explain sometimes there's dual reference, or to the floor. It does not mean the bill is going to be voted on. Very important to understand. Referral just means it moved from step A to step B. Step B is a whole other process in and of itself. So the bill is voted on whether to bring the, and I changed this word, bring, but it wasn't changed in time. It's not bring the bill to the floor, it's refer to the full chamber. Very important. Sometimes bills have two references, as I mentioned. The first section of law that's modified, and the second. Particularly if bills change anything to do with criminal law, they always have a second reference. Bills that involve spending of money always have a second reference. So there's a process. It's reflected on the bill that it says it has to go to two committees. So people say, oh, who was opposed to that bill? That should have been easy. Getting the bills through these process takes a lot of diligence and determination by the sponsor of the bill. And all of us, Gary, George, and I, know this. You have to, in some cases, persuade the staff, which has sometimes an outsized role in making judgments about sort of what's appropriate, that a bill should move forward. Now, in the Assembly, the staff has a great central staff, which has subject matter experts, has a great deal of input into deciding how the bill should be drafted and whether they're going to move. Early example, George and I carried a bill when he first got there, because you may remember that Astorino, notwithstanding that additional money was put in for childcare in the county budget, the county legislature refused to, they increased the payment share of the parent, notwithstanding that there was money allocated. George and I did a bill, tried to do a bill, to force basically county legislatures to follow what was in the budget. The staff of the Assembly did not like my bill because they thought statewide it would have an adverse impact on counties that were trying to increase the amount of money for childcare. And we had a big fight, and I ultimately had to change the bill to meet their requirements. My only point is, in the Assembly, the central staff has a significant role, and if you are an advocate on an issue where you have a sponsor who loves the idea and has the bill, but you don't seem to be moving it, sometimes the staff is a block. In the Senate, it's much more a member-driven institution. The staff has less of a determinant role in deciding whether a bill can move, but they also are very important. There's a great deal of deference to them. They're there, I mean, hopefully we're going to change some of the staff now that we're in control, but having been there before, and as counsel to the Senate Democrats when we won last time, you appreciate people who have institutional memory and subject matter experience. So some of them continue on. They do have a lot of value. One thing I didn't mention is co-sponsorship. It is important to try to get additional people on bills. It shows the speaker or the leader that there's a significant amount of support for something which the speaker or leader may be reluctant to bring forward. If you have the majority of the Democratic conference signed onto a bill, that's a big deal in the Assembly. Same in the Senate as well. Okay, getting on the calendar. So the bill is voted out of your committee, and you didn't go to the meeting, but you see that online. And it was referred to the calendar. The calendar, again, does not mean you're going to vote on the bill. Voting on the bill is really the determination of the leaders, generally speaking, subject to some procedural changes, procedural challenges. The leaders decide what bills are going to be voted on. So that is why having Senator Stuart Cousins and Carl Hastie, both of whom are fantastic, and I have worked with them both as leaders and understand they have big conferences, diverse conferences. They know the issues that are, for example, the indivisible priorities. They also know the priorities of, somebody who's from the northern border who is a Democrat who we need to save. And we need to make sure that that person doesn't have to take a vote that is going to kill them in the next election. So they have the big picture view, but it really is up to, on the big issues, the leader or the speaker to determine. So what happens? I'm just going to skip to an important part, the second bullet, active list on the Senate calendar. In the Senate, every day a list is published called the active list. That is the bills that are actually going to be voted on. It generally comes out for the public the night before. Let's say you're tracking a bill. You can go on the Senate website and see the Senate active list for the next day. Let's say we get to early voting and it gets through this process. And I tell you, keep watching the active list, and then all of a sudden, some Sunday night, it comes out that on Monday we're going to vote on one of these expansion of voting bills that are a priority for you. That means that, subject to some things that can be changed and go wrong, members are prepared to vote on that bill. They prepare their debate. If they're going to oppose it, they know their arguments. The majority and minority negotiate how much time is going to be spent on a bill. Everything is sort of geared up for a bill if it's on the active list. If it's on the third reading calendar, it could sit there for the entire session and never come to the floor. The active list is a thing that matters in the Senate. In the Assembly, they don't have really the same thing until the end of session. They do have a debate list at the end, but prior to that, it's truly up to the majority leader of the Assembly with the Speaker to decide which bills are going to come forward. A lot of bills are repeaters, years and years. I've been in Albany for 25 years. Some of these bills have been coming year after year. One thing I didn't mention, I think it was in here. In the past, when we had a Republican majority in the Senate, we would do these one-house bills in the Assembly, all the things that most of you support. We passed them in the Assembly. We knew they'd never pass in the Senate. Different day today. We have a Democratic majority. We want to work together to get bills that are going to pass both houses. We don't need symbolic victories, we need real victories. Right. And that's what we're working on. So just to say, when we get to the Assembly, the majority leader, the Speaker has not picked a new majority leader, right, Gary? It was Congressman Joe Morelli from Rochester, who was a terrific majority leader, but he has run for Congress, and now we're waiting for the Speaker to decide on a new majority leader. That person runs the floor operation in the Assembly and helps decide which bills are going to move forward. So, not to say that everything is solved, that all these issues are not resolved procedurally, but they are relevant to you, and I hate to be so down in the weeds, but this is really where the rubber meets the road, getting these bills over the finish line. So the majority leader and the Speaker decide on the bills. They are going to come to the floor. Amendments and hostile amendments. Yes, bills can be amended generally by the sponsor. There is a way to do hostile amendments in both the Senate and the Assembly. Hostile amendments generally fail, that's why they're called hostile. Usually they're on a party line vote. The Republicans in the Assembly will propose a hostile amendment. We vote it down. Now I'm in the Senate. The Democrats, when I was in the minority, would propose a hostile amendment. We would lose, but then we'd end up voting on the other bill. So yes, but don't spend a lot of your time on figuring out how to improve the bill. By the time it gets to the floor, as imperfect as it is, we are moving towards a bill that is going to pass. So get your comments, your thoughts, your corrections, your input, long before it gets to this third reading active list or on the calendar. That's when we are going to vote. It's unlikely. It is possible, it's unlikely. After explanation, discussion, or debate, a vote is taken. Obviously, majority passes and it moves to the second chamber. Generally, these bills, in the past, more progressive bills went to the Assembly because they passed there, then they were sent to the Senate to die. It's going to be a whole new ball of wax, and we're going to work collaboratively together to move bills. Because it's better for the public to see that a bill is moving through both houses, and we have people we are accountable to your point. We are accountable to our citizens to move these bills, and now we have the public opportunity to make that case. So I think the next slide. One thing that was mentioned here, I just want to say, debate. Debate is televised. You can watch it on the Senate and Assembly website. Debates can be game changers for votes. They really can change the way people vote. I think in our conference, we are meeting for the first time this week, Tuesday and Wednesday, as a joint conference to decide how to move forward on these issues. I think that's going to be, hopefully we resolve a lot of that beforehand. But in the old days, and on marriage equality, the first time we brought it to the floor, and Michael may remember this, we had a debate, we lost on the bill, but we did change some votes because of the passion of individual people who debated the bill. So debate can be a game changer and is a place where the public has the opportunity to be in the gallery and have a difference. When you have 200 people up there watching what you say, I can assure you, many legislators are more careful and more thoughtful. So there is a role during debate to have people present. In my opinion, it makes a difference. Once the bill passes, the governor has 10 days to sign, excluding Sundays, sign or veto. If out of session, the governor has 30 days to sign. This is all sort of the rules. In real life, the governor's office communicates whether they have a problem with the bill, and that could happen this year with some of the things we're talking about. We negotiate what's called a chapter amendment, which is a technical change to the bill that will be adopted when the bill in the next session. So the bill could be signed. He could say, I signed the bill, but the understanding is you are going to adopt a law that modifies the bill to meet his specifications, his objections. And that happens frequently. That's just the process of negotiation. But you will see that. I just signed off on a chapter amendment on the bill that would make mandatory the reporting of child sexual assault in private schools. It used to be only in public schools. He just signed the bill to make it apply in private schools. Yes, it's great. We agreed to a chapter amendment to deal with some of the technical things that the governor's office objected to about the bill. That's fine. That's the nature of compromise. We got a good bill and we're moving ahead. So I'm going to move now. What's my time? Okay, so the reason I say how the budget process works, which I would change the title, go to the next one. And Gary, you haven't weighed in yet, but keep going. Is that in the executive budget, this governor has put lots of policy. So while you thought bills carried ideas, and I'll give you an example, on the sickle cell community, which I've been very involved with. For years, they were pushing a bill that allocated some money for sickle cell research. It doesn't matter, I keep telling them, that you have that bill. If it has money allocated, it's going to be in the budget. It needs to be in the budget. Stop worrying about a bill and sponsors. Get the governor's office to agree that putting money in for sickle cell is a priority. Let's get it in the budget, and then we can work on the language of how the money is allocated. So the budget is probably the most important thing that we as state legislators do, not only for the money itself, but second, how the money is allocated, and third, issues that you would not think have to do with money. So example, in the governor's proposed budgets in prior years, raise the age was in, minimum wage increase, sexual harassment policy, mandatory sexual harassment training, ethics reform, the Reproductive Health Act was in the budget one year. Various years, various things are in his proposed budget. So be prepared this year, likely with a Democratic majority in both houses, that the governor is going to take some of the issues that we care about and put them in his proposed budget as part of his policy plan, and then we're going to deal with them in the context of the budget, which must be done, as Gary pointed out wisely, by March 31st. Otherwise, we don't get paid, and a number of other things happen. But generally, this governor has been very adamant that we do on-time budgets, and we've tried very hard and come very close. So next slide. So executive budgeting in New York State. The state legislature acts as a critic. We have very limited power with the budget. This is one of the ironies. These big things are in there, but the state legislature is really able to reduce or strike out things, but it cannot add money, and it really cannot reallocate where the money goes. You want to give $200 million to something, we can't take that $200 million and move it to somewhere else on our own. Through negotiation, and that's what happens, we have the ability, but we have very limited power at the end of the day to strike back against his policy proposal. That's one of the reasons, from a structural point of view, he uses the budget this way, because he has the upper hand from a legal point of view because of this case, Pataki versus Silver, I think is the name of it. Okay, go to the next slide. So here's what really happened. After his budget, each house of the legislature does their own sort of counter budget using the actual bill that he proposed. It's actually a series of bills. Let's say he has 6 bills. The budget is divided into various little components. One is criminal justice, one is health, one is education, one is transportation, economic development, And then each one has both a language section and a money section. You don't need to know this level of detail, just to say that then the Assembly takes those bills and modifies them as they're, to the extent they're authorized, with their own proposal, and the Senate does the same. Each house, that version by the Assembly reflects the Assembly sitting in a room, the Assembly Democrats, 107 of them sitting in one room day after day, saying this is what we like, what we don't like, change this, change that, here's our priority, we want more money for New York City Housing Authority, always a big issue, we're gonna want more money for the MTA, you know, just thinking we want election reform in there. They're gonna come up with their proposal. The Senate Democrats this year are gonna come up with our counter proposal, and each side will adopt its own budget. So sort of just an exercise. Because then, you gotta negotiate. That's where the real trouble comes, the challenge comes. After we adopt our respective budgets, and also we agree on how much money is still on the table after the governor put all his money on the table. There's some money on the side, usually, that's left for the negotiating process, adds by the Assembly and the Senate. Traditionally, the Senate Assembly Democrats added all the money back for public education. The Senate Republicans added the money for charter schools. The Assembly added them all the money for criminal justice improvements and social service. The Senate put in all the sort of whatever they could put in for Long Island schools and what other stuff they wanted. That was traditionally how this added pot was worked out. We're going to be different now, obviously, but once we pass our own respective budgets, they set up these conference committees. That's supposed to be an effort to publicly resolve differences between the two houses. This is just the Senate and the Assembly sit in these conference committees. The mothership, someone said, why did you have to put that word on there, mothership? Because that is what it's called. And I again, think it's important that people sort of begin to get familiar with the language of the state legislature if you care about these outcomes. The mothership is the supreme conference committee of the leaders of the Senate and the Assembly, both parties, both majorities and minorities, and a few of the sort of most senior members are on the mothership. They have a public meeting, not much happens, then they go behind closed doors and things get resolved. And then there are conference committees, I've never been on one, but I've staffed them, and they also have a public meeting, not much happens. But at the end of the day, these committees are the place that a lot of the smaller adds, for example, of money and program differences are negotiated out in private. The big issues, like we're talking about these big policy issues, those really are likely going to fall, to the extent that there's challenges by the Senate and Assembly, to the leaders meeting with the governor, and that's what they always call 3 men in a room. It's actually not 3 men in a room. This year we have Andrea, but in the past, even then, there's lots of staff in the room. The division of the budget is in the room. They know how much money there is. The chief finance person for the Assembly and the Senate is in the room. The chief counsel I was at was in the room. There's other people in that room. They are hashing out these big policy issues after hearing from their conference. So if, for example, these election law reforms that we're talking about, voting reforms, are in the governor's budget, if at the end of the day, we can't achieve resolution between the Senate, Assembly, and the governor's office, they're going to sit in a room and try to get the best compromise that reflects what their members want, and the governor is going to push for what he wants, and then we will aim to get a compromise, as we generally do. And I'm optimistic on the issues that are very important to Indivisible, many of which the governor said he's going to highlight. We're going to get there this year, and I am very hopeful we're going to get there. So I say large issues reserved for the end, senior staff and leadership. You can move on. There's a great deal of pressure to do an on-time budget for many reasons. One is the fact that the public pressure from the editorial boards is great if you don't do the budget on time. Some people are very sensitive to that. Pressure, obviously, because members don't get paid. We have a lot of members who have, the vast majority have no outside income, very dependent on their paycheck to meet their own housing and personal needs. They need to get paid. And thirdly is there is this sense that having an on-time budget is part of sort of responsible governing, and that you are expected to do it, and that plays into it as well. So there's pressure to adopt an on-time budget. We've come very, very close in the last few years. But the reason I went through the budget process is because the big issues we care about, I suspect, are going to be in the mix, in the budget, as well as legislatively. Doesn't mean you can't do both, and in the end there has to be a compromise. But because of the pressure of the indivisible movement, the taking out of the IDC, the fact that there's a great sense that we need to change early voting and expand voting rights, a number of the other things, the Reproductive Health Act, that are priorities for you and are priorities for many members of our conference. My suspicion is many of these things will be in the governor's proposed budget. So I'm going to stop there. I hope that's helpful. And I'm sorry.
I don't want to take over your presentation, and you did an excellent job in presenting it. But there were you don't mind, do you?
No.
There were a few things that Shelley kind of skirted over and I think are important for you to know. And one is, I'll start with the on-time budget. Remember the bad old days when we had late budgets? Well, there was a reason we had late budgets. And the reason we had late budgets is because, for the most part, the Democrats in the Assembly were fighting for you. And we gave up a lot to make sure that schools and housing and social services were taken care of at detriment to ourselves. We just wouldn't go along with charter schools. Shelley could attest to all of this. We wouldn't go along with charter schools, and Governor Pataki wanted us to do that. We then had this court decision. It was Pataki's Court of Appeals. It was mentioned in the presentation, Pataki v. Silver, and we lost it. And basically what that said was the governor is all-powerful, and the legislature can just say no. That was all we can say. We can say yes, or we can say no. We couldn't change things. We couldn't reduce the governor's. We could reduce the governor's budget. We couldn't increase the governor's budget by one dime, and we couldn't put language in the budget, which we used to do. So now we're given anybody here named Hobson? Hope not. We're given a Hobson's choice. Okay, you do this or you get that. I'll give you a perfect example. 2 years ago, there was pension reform in the budget. And I'm not a believer in a budget being a document of policy. Legislation should be policy. The budget should just be dollars, just be numbers. But the way we have it now, the governor's, Patterson started this, putting all sorts of policy issues in the budget, and the legislature cannot say no to it. And the choice was Tier 6, which means that firemen had to work until they were 65 and contribute to the pension. How you feel about that? Or 401k for state workers. Now, any of you the state workers know that's not what you've always had, a defined benefit for state pensions, and the governor offered a defined contribution versus that if we didn't do Tier 6. What happens? You got Tier 6. And I don't think Tier 6 was good. I mean, it is going to save the counties a lot of money. County Executive Latimer, I know, is happy now because his pension costs are going to be a little lower. But to the individuals that would have been receiving a pension under a 401k, especially college, he attacked college professors first for some strange reason. I don't know why, but he did that, and it just wasn't a good thing. Anyway, yeah, did cut up. I'm not going to go too much more. I have one question. Does everyone in here know what MAGA stands for? Yeah. No, Moscow Agent Governing America.
I just want to say, for those of you who are from Yonkers, that for the 6 years I served in the Assembly, Gary and I, with Andrea and George when he was there, really battled together on behalf of every challenge that we had for Yonkers. We were very much joined at the hip, and I know Nader's coming, but we really were sort of the warriors for Yonkers, and I'm extremely appreciative. I'm sorry that I left him, but we're going to continue to do well for Yonkers with Gary's help. Yes?
So I guess I'm confused about, thank you. I'm a little confused about what sounds like a contradiction between the legislature can't add anything to the budget, but the legislatures have their own proposed budgets. And I'm thinking of it in terms of, so suppose the governor allocates funding for early voting, and there's nothing for cameras on those voting machines scattered all over the county for 2 weeks, nights and days.
When I was talking about the ads, what really is the financial people, and each house basically contracts out to an outside financial agency to do an independent assessment of how much money the state projects it will have in the coming year. So if the Assembly's analysis is actually you're $1 billion too low, and the Senate's is you're $500 million too low, then they'll compromise on how much is left. That could be allocated to someone to say, oh, we're going to add this money for the cameras on the machines as you want, or someone could say, no, you know what, we're going to use it for, some other thing that people want. And there's a lot of things that people want. At the end, the speaker asks everyone in the Assembly, Democratic Conference, to make a list of what they want, and it's billions of dollars more than we're allocating. But yes, there is an opportunity, and that's where so much of this is negotiation and not sort of rigid. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Shelley, for that. I have a question about a part of the process at the beginning. So you mentioned that when people show up at public hearings or up in Albany, that can have an influence. And that makes a lot of sense to me, but it's hard for people to do. So what I'm curious about is something you didn't mention, which is that the New York State Senate, probably unbeknownst to most people, actually has a platform for online engagement, which most of us never bothered to look at, because why bother engaging with a rigged system? But it's not rigged anymore, or hopefully not. And so my understanding is that any one of us can create an account on newyorkstate.gov as a constituent, register as with our senator. We can sign on to bills and follow them. We can message you. There's a certain amount of transparency, so we can see how many people are following the bill, but there's more. You can launch a petition, and your petition can say something like, support the Reproductive Health Care Act, and you can tell people to sign it. People anywhere in the state can sign it through that portal, and their senators get a message saying that they support the bill. And so my question is, why aren't we using this? Is it that nobody in the Senate thinks it matters, it's never been used? Because if 50,000 or 100,000 people across New York State were visibly signing on to these petitions, and you have senators all over the place hearing that these things have support. So is there any viability to this?
Well, I'm going to be very cynical here. What you're talking about, was designed by the Senate Republicans, IT folks, for them. Whether it will continue when we are the majority.
Actually, it was designed by Democrats.
No.
I worked with the people who designed it.
I was there then.
Yeah.
We did, but then they took it over.
lost control.
They took it over. So I don't know, answer to your point, who's going to control? The Democrats are going to control the IT functions of the Senate. We should, and we may change that, and we may adopt that, and we may make it better, and we may change it a different way. I don't want to get ahead of myself. The things that you see on the Senate website right now were implemented by the Senate Republicans, and they further their point of view. So I hope that we have a very interactive portal, which we chose to do when we became the majority, but they hijacked it back for their use. And so I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Okay, that's fair.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah.
Could we jump ahead, Liz, to the slide of our priorities?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Next one, Liz. Yeah, okay. If I might.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's this slide and the next one. It doesn't really matter. Just as an example, Shelley, we have, as an organization, a medium long list of priorities. There's this. Okay, there they are. So it's not tremendous. You see, but it's not one item. It's not 1,000 items. So as an activist group, what's the best way for us to push this kind of priority list through the legislature?
Great question.
Well, two things. As I mentioned, this week, for the first time, our Senate Democratic Conference is meeting to go over our priorities. And I am very much a team player. Those of you who know me, I am going to listen to my new colleagues, 15 out of 39 are new. I believe that these priorities that you have listed are shared by almost every one of our new members, if not everyone. I haven't heard them all. Question of how you can do it. One is, I would say, let us have 2 days to decide what we're going to do first, and come back to you and say,
We'll give you 3.
okay, thank you. No, you won't, but some people will say, okay, I think, personally, I believe on voting rights. That is hopefully at the beginning of our list. I believe reproductive health care and the Comprehensive Contraception Coverage Act, which we have tried to do when we were in the minority procedurally and we lost, are likely to be at the start of our list. Go down, please. Gun safety, the extreme risk protection order, and the other elements, the Strengthen the SAFE Act, we tried to do procedurally, so I'm only giving a sense. We brought motions only in the 2 months that I sat in the Senate to get those. Indian Point, I don't know. I will defer till we have our conversation. The Green Light and the DREAM Act, we have to talk as a group. So I just am asking for the patience with us to get ourselves organized. We do not know who the chairs of the committees are. We will know before Tuesday.
So my question was not content-oriented.
Yeah, process.
I'm delighted that it looks good.
Looks good.
For an activist group like us, when
Yeah.
you got 100 plus what have you, what's the best way for us to push through and advocate and follow a medium list of priorities, a medium number? There's 10 or 15
Okay,
priorities.
one is, you've already done an incredibly effective job in pushing these issues because you have Senator Stuart Cousins coming to your meeting, hearing you, knowing you. Myself, I was in Indivisible, New Rochelle yesterday. Every elected official from New Rochelle was there, or the Sound Shore. We know what these are. I mean, I would say keep doing what you're doing. Number one, that is, you are on the winning side of making sure that these issues are considered. I feel quite confident about that. I'm happy to talk in private, sort of about what I don't want to say before we really have a chance to talk to our colleagues and figure out if we want a public show on something. We're going to come back to you. Some things we want them on. Some things we're going to have a press conference on. Some things we're going to have a rally on. Some things we're going to do a petition drive. Give us the little bit of time to figure that out. I'm sorry, but that's the best I can do.
Okay,
Yeah.
First of all, that was the best civics lesson I think I
Yeah,
had.
that was great.
I don't know where anyone else went to 5th grade, but in my 5th grade class, no one explained it to me like that.
Well, I went to Casimir Pulaski School.
Okay, well, that was fabulous, so thank you, because I think we all feel like, oh, wow, that's how it works. Except here's my reaction.
Yeah.
It's a miracle that anything happens, okay? It's a miracle that any law gets passed at all. And so this is going to sound maybe a little cynical and maybe a little pressuring, but here's what I think after listening to this. The Democrats have had for many years the cover of a jerk governor and a Republican Senate. You don't have that anymore because our jerk governor has turned into our governor again because he doesn't have the IDC anymore to protect him. So you guys have 2 years, because who knows what's going to happen in 2 years. You have 2 years to prove to us that now that you are Democrat Assembly, Democrat Senate, Democrat Governor, that some of this is actually going to happen within a reasonable amount of time, which is why I said you could have 3 days. But my point is that Steve's question was right. What can we do to help you? It's what can we do to help you make this happen? Because obviously we all want it to happen. You all know exactly what we want. But now the question is, given that crazy system that has clearly been cobbled together over decades of idiocy and corruption, come on, that is exactly what it is. You don't need a complicated system like that to actually pass a law. You don't. You can simplify that with will. But let's just say that doesn't exist. Now that you control everything, you, the royal you, we, the people, are expecting to see actual results in a reasonable amount of time that comport with what we care about. And I'm afraid to say this, but if you fail, we're going to be really upset because you don't have any excuses anymore.
Well, let me just respond in a few ways. One, you don't run for office if you're as cynical as what you just described. Honestly, as someone who has gotten things done, and as Gary's gotten things done, George in the minority, myself in the minority, important things. Just helping youngers get through a $55 million shortfall because somebody misread the state budget and avoid hundreds of people being laid off. So I'm not as cynical as you. I believe that we can get stuff done, and we have gotten stuff done. Notwithstanding, it's not the agenda items here, but I don't think you should take that away from what we have done and accomplished for the people, notwithstanding the barriers that were ahead of us. Secondly, I think you know, based on who we are, the people who have been here time and time again, that our heart is in these issues, and we are in this running, going through this process, and standing up here because we want to get it done. You have our utmost promise to do our best. I am in it, let me just say this, for the long haul. Is everything going to be done in year 1 and 2? Like you said, no, because we have people like James Scoofus who won in a district that is hard to win, that we need to win again so that we stay in the majority. I am someone who was there and saw it lost because of 2 people who were viable for money. They were basically got more money, got more staff, got more power. 2 guys switched sides one day and let the other side take control. It's never going to happen again. We are in it for the long haul. We're going to be responsible, aggressive stewards of what you have elected us to do. But I don't think it's fair to start with the cynicism you say and basically say, it's on you. You have our word, and we will do our best, and we will be here telling you every step of the way. And regardless of what you think of the governor, and we disagree, the fact is he is going to be our ally on a lot of the substance that we want. And that's where the rubber meets the road. We want stuff done. Put the words aside. We want the stuff done. So that's where I respectfully disagree with your tone, but I get this up.
I have a very simple question.
Yeah.
How do you think 3 men in a room or 2 men and a woman is going to change?
I think it'll change quite dramatically. One, again, I'm not a fan of using that phrase, just as I explained. That being said, first place, Senator Stuart Cousins is a very rooted person in the real world of our constituents. And I think some people in elected office have lost that. Having spent all my years in Yonkers working as her partner and friend, we go to places and talk to people about their real problems, and she brings that. Whether it is, as you said in your poem earlier, somebody dropping off the kids at childcare and then crying because the kid was crying, she understands that. She is going to talk about the issues that matter a lot to women and working families that I don't think got brought up in those meetings when I was in the room, and I think she will do that. And she also will, she's a very strong listener of her conference, and she's going to try to represent a collective view of what's best for our conference as a whole. So I think it really will change. Clearly the fact that she's a woman, she's an African American, she grew up in a tough world, and she's made it by being a tough and remarkably compassionate person at the same time, I think is going to change what happens in that room. And frankly, she won as majority leader with all your help and got rid of the IDC, and that sends a very strong, powerful message. I just want to say that my sister and brother-in-law are here from California. They came to listen to this. They tried to join Indivisible after they came here from my campaign, so we're building
Are David Carlucci and Diane Savino going to behave?
So far, we had one meeting. I assume they will. I give them the benefit of the doubt. They are very smart about politics. They see that you won. Andrea is the leader. She was elected unanimously with their support, and I'm very confident that we are going to be all as one.
You know, this is going to be an ongoing conversation, I think, as time goes on. So I know that people have a lot of questions, but let's hold them for right now, okay? Thank you, Shelley. That was wonderful. Okay.